The topic is diagramming arguments, and we already discussed how to do that in this little video. We're going to go over some examples, right? A little bit more complicated examples so that we can get some more guided practice on how to do that. So here is our first one. We have this text, this passage here. Because publishers are aiming at a national market, the number one criterion for any textbook is avoidance of controversy. Since they must respond to a variety of specific criteria from their buyers, this has resulted in what has been called the dumbing down of textbooks. Okay. So we will start, by reading the passage, looking for an argument, right? And that means, again, looking for a conclusion and reasons, propositions that are expressing reasons to believe that conclusion or reasons that that conclusion is the case. And we'll, right. And this is what we could get, what we should get. Yeah. Now let's look at these words in red here. Because and since, and this has resulted in. Those are the indicator words, indicator phrases in this case also that give us an idea of what the structure of the argument is, right? So if we go back here, we say because, and that tells us that what's coming is a reason, right? Because, right? Bisabab, here comes the cause, yeah? Because publishers are aiming at a national market, the number one criteria for any textbook is avoidance of controversy. So we have now two propositions, right? Publishers are aiming at a national market, and the number one criterion for any textbook is avoidance of controversy. And the word because tells us that what is coming is a reason, right, for what comes after that, right? So publishers are aiming at a national market is the reason that the number one criterion for any textbook is avoidance of controversy. We have another word here, since, which is an indicator word, and that has a similar function as the word because. It tells us that a reason is coming, since, yeah? Since they must respond to a variety of specific criteria from their buyers, this has resulted in what has been called the dumbing down of textbooks. As we have a lot of indications here. Since is that, here's the because, and this has resulted in. So here comes the result. This tells us that the effect is coming. So we have the cause and the result. So the cause is they must respond to a variety of specific criteria from their buyers. The result is the dumbing down of textbooks. We can go back here once we have, sort of discussed the analysis of that in terms of these indicator terms. We can lay it out here, and we can get something like this. One, publishers are aiming at a national market, right? Which was the first reason given here after because. Two, one criteria for any textbook is avoidance of controversy. Three, publishers must respond to a variety of specific criteria from their buyers. Four, there has been a dumbing down of textbooks, right? So the conclusion is four, or that is indicated by this phrase here. This is resulted in. So what we've done here is essentially everything that we learned to do in the last unit, the last week, which was to formalize the argument, right? List out the propositions and put the conclusion last, right? And then give everything a number. Here we don't need to use the C for conclusion. We can just give it a number as well. So we just have a number of premises specified with its own distinct number to differentiate it from the others. Because these numbers are what we're going to use in the diagram, right? And again, the last video, the essential indicator, the symbol is the arrow, the inference arrow. We're going to use the inference arrow to show the inferential relation, the logical relation between the propositions, in virtue of which some are premises and others are conclusions, which we infer from those premises, right? And we're going to use the indicator words to interpret where those inference errors should go. That is to say, what the logical relations between these propositions actually are. Right, so let's take the first two here. Publishers are aiming at a national market, and the number one criteria for any textbook is avoidance of controversy. The word because, again, tells us that one is the reason and two is the consequence. So when we make the diagram, we're just going to write one to represent the first proposition. Draw the inference arrow there, going to two, which basically tells us that from one we are going to two. Yeah, so again, the inference arrow is a directional thing, and it takes us from the premise to the conclusion. So the inference arrow should be pointing from the premise to the conclusion in this way. 1 to 2, right? Okay. So let's look at the next part of this. Right. Publishers must respond to a variety of specific criteria from their buyers. That's right here after the since, right? So that word since tells us that 3, the fact that publishers must respond to a variety of specific criteria from the buyers, is the reason, right? And for the consequence that there has been a dumbing down of textbooks, because that's right what it has resulted in. This has resulted in what has been called the dumbing down of textbooks. So essentially the result is that there has been a dumbing down of textbooks. So we have 3 and 4, and 3 is the reason for 4. So we just draw the inference arrow from 3 to 4, right? And that's simple too. Okay. Now, what happens when we combine these two inferences? We have basically two inferences here in the text and the argument of the text, and they do have a relation. So we have a complex argument. Publishers are aiming at a national market leads to the number one criterion for any textbooks being avoidance of controversy. And since publishers must respond to a variety of specific criteria from the buyers, that has resulted in dumbing down of textbooks. So let's think about this carefully. 2 says that the publishers want most of all to avoid controversy. Right? That is to avoid making people angry about what is in the book. And 3 says that their buyers have a large number of demands about what the book should have or not have in it. So it looks like they want to make everyone happy, and they have many different kinds of people to make happy. So they keep taking things out of the books, right, to avoid angering different people, which results in the textbook getting dumbed down. So 2 and 3 in combination result in the dumbing down. Yeah. And remember, we talked about in the last unit, the kind of relation between a premises and a conclusion where 2 or more premises in combination lead to a conclusion. We distinguish that case from the case where we have more than one premise, each leading to a conclusion, but where each premise will lead to that conclusion or provide reason for believing that conclusion, even by itself, when it's not in combination with the others. Here, though, we have the linked argument. That is the case where we have more than one premise, but they only constitute a reason for believing the conclusion when you combine them. If you were to take each one by itself, it wouldn't be a reason at all. So instead of it being the case really that either one or another premise is a reason for believing the conclusion, technically it's the combination of the two that is the reason, right? And we see that's the case here. So, it's only when we combine these two facts, first, that the number one criteria for any textbook is avoidance of controversy, and secondly, that publishers have to respond to a variety of specific criteria from their buyers. When you combine those two, it results in the dumbing down of the textbooks and the way we explained here, right? Okay. So we see what we've done. We've kind of read the text, and we also have to take some time to interpret what the text is telling us, because it is a little bit elliptical. What we mean to say is it gives us some very few words, right, in describing what's happening, And that requires us to take some time to sort of break down what it's really telling us, right? And that's what we tried to do here by restating it in sort of, maybe more detailed, more simple terms, or what some people like to call the small change, right? As we did here. So we're basically saying that, publishers want to avoid controversy, right? That means they want to avoid making people angry about what is in the book, right? That's what 2 says here, essentially. And 3 tells us that, all these different buyers have a large variety of demands, or have a large variety of things that they will be sensitive about or get angry about. And so there's so many things that the publishers end up feeling motivated to take out of the books. That makes the books dumbed down. So this combination of those 2 factors is what creates the dumbing down, right? Okay. So once we've explained that and understood that, we go to the diagram. So remember, that's how we do that in the diagram. Okay. So what we have here is this one fact that publishers are aiming at a national market, right? That's to say people from all across the country that have, all of them, there's a diverse group of people. They all have their, different sensitivities, their different demands, and different kinds of things which they, would have to be removed from textbooks in order to keep everyone happy. Yeah, the national market. Yeah, and because it's aimed at a national market, the number one criteria for any textbook is avoidance of controversy. Okay, so 1 leads to 2, and then 2 in combination with 3, right, is what leads to 4, as we just explained. And so the way this diagram will is that we'll have number 1, and we'll have an arrow leading straight to 2. Recall that this is what we call a serial inference. That is an inference from one premise to one conclusion. Yeah? So like here, I'm going to make a little circle around it with this arrow, right? You can see this is the one inference. The first arrow is a serial inference. The second arrow is between the combination of 2 premises and a conclusion. And so that second inference is, again, what we called a linked inference, right? Or linked reasoning. And we called it linked because it's actually the link between the 2 that leads to 4. It's not either 2 by itself or 3 by itself. Okay? But with the combination of 2 and 3 leads to 4. And so we are representing it in this way, almost like a mathematics equation, right? 2 plus 3 leads to 4. Okay? Yeah. Now, recall that this was distinct from the convergent inference. And in the convergent inference, we may, for example, have a proposition 2 and a proposition 3, both of which by themselves lead to 4. So in that case, we would just have 2, but we wouldn't have a plus. We would write 2 here, we would write 3 here. We would have one arrow going from 2 to 4, and a separate arrow going from 3 to 4, be indicating that both 2 and 3 are premises for 4, but it's not the combination of them which is necessary. Each one by itself is a premise for 4. That was a different type of inference from the linked one. But in this case, it's linked. Last time I did tell you that some of the exercises in the diagramming arguments exercises can be complex arguments. And we discussed then how they will look, because the examples we gave there were the simple ones. But here's an example of a complex argument in the diagram. 1 leads directly to 2, and then 2 in combination with 3 leads to 4. So you might find some like that in the exercises, but you're going to find some which are different from this in the exercises, and you'll find some in the exercises which are different from any of the ones that we've given in the examples. And that's because you only know that you understand the procedure and the concept behind the procedure if you are able to correctly diagram arguments which are in a completely different form than the ones that we've given examples. That's because understanding and remembering are not the same, right? So remembering is essential, but in this class, we want you to be able to also understand the concept and actually, be empowered with the skill to deploy the concept in new and unprecedented cases or cases that you haven't encountered before. And that's what is going to be our mark of success in whether we've actually been able to develop our critical thinking skills. All right, so go to the exercises and be ready for confronting situations that we haven't covered in any of these examples, and be open to, or let's say confident to, deploy the concepts you've learned here, the skill, this procedure of diagramming arguments to these new cases, and see what you get, right? So the important thing is when you look at that and you say, well, I don't know this answer because the teacher didn't tell me how to answer this kind yet, then you know that your test is figure out how you're going to do it now on your own with the tools and skills that you have. All right? And then don't be afraid to make a mistake, but be afraid not to be willing to learn from your mistake. That's the problem. Okay? If you can learn from your mistake, then your mistake is good. And yeah, then your mistake will have been something you should look forward to, right? At least in this case, because it's only exercises. Okay? No severe consequences are coming from it. Okay? Okay.